Moving on, I would now like to call our chief guest, Mr. Jangoo Dalal, Managing Director and President, Avaya, to kindly take his seat on the dais.
Mr. Jangoo Dalal is an industry veteran with more than 23 years of experience in the technology industry. Sir has varied and diverse experience in the IT and communications industry, encompassing sales, marketing and product management, channel management, and strategic planning. Prior to joining Avaya, Sir has held key positions in various companies like D-Link India Limited, Cisco Systems, and Wipro. Mr. Dalal graduated from St. Xavier's College in Mumbai and holds a master's degree in business administration from Bombay University. Today, Sir will share with us his valuable insights on the topic, key communications and collaboration trends, impact on telecom industry. Sir, I request you to kindly preside over the session.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure being with such bright, young, energetic minds this morning, and I think my trip to Pune, especially to Lawal, is well worth seeing all your shining faces. Before I start off and spend 30 minutes talking about the topic I've put together for this morning, I would really like to echo Mr. Goyal's thoughts that the first 20-30 minutes of Professor Patil's address to us was one of the better ones I've heard in a very long time. Just listening to him, I think all of you students and participants here should feel extremely privileged that you have a guide, mentor, and leader in Dr. Patil, who has such a wide encompassing view of the industry. With that, what I would try to do, because I've had the onerous task of having the first presentation over the 2 days, is kind of run you through what I think, what we in Avaya think are some of the key trends which are impacting our industry and our business, especially as it relates to telecom in India. I have about 15-20 slides. A lot of it is something which you would have heard anecdotally here and there, but what I'm going to do is present it to you, and you as budding telecom managers, some thoughts on how the industry, which you all are going to captain and drive in future, is going to look like. Before I do that, I thought I'll just bring us all onto the same page as to where we are in terms of the telecom industry in India. As Professor Patil mentioned, this all started off with the new telecom policy document, which came out sometime in 1995-96. And I personally started my journey from IT into telecom at that point in time. I was then associated with a company which is called Wipro, which did a joint venture with British Telecom. And we were one of the first entrants into the so-called private telecom space at that point in time. And I ran a business which was about public email and VSATs and fax store and forward. And I remember my entire backbone in those days for running a telecom service was based on 64 MB pipes. From there to today, all of you on your mobiles with 3G have much more bandwidth. You've come a long way. But do remember that this is an industry which is not more than a decade old. So in that sense, the telecom business in India is a fairly young industry. And at this point in time, I'm not going to read through all of these slide points over here. They're there for your reference. But just keep in mind that the CAGR which we've had, upwards of 30-35%, we've reached a run rate of about $38 billion. And if we continue on that run rate of 35% CAGR, within the next 2.5 to 3 years, this will be a $100 billion industry in India. Now, if you look at it from a global perspective, a $100 billion industry in any economy is a pretty impactful component of our GDP. And at that point in time, even right now, we contribute upwards of 3.5-4% in terms of direct revenue contribution. I think if you look at the indirect contribution, and there are whole hosts of case studies on that, the impact would be manifold. But in a short period of 2.5, 3 years, a $100 billion industry in an economy which would be about 1.5, 2 trillion will be pretty sizable, pretty impactful. So all you folks who've toiling many hours trying to get into the telecom industry, you are still getting into industry which is going to be a big sunrise part of our economy. At this point in time, I've just kept some of the points over here. And I've not mentioned all the stuff that we anyway read in newspapers day in, day out, and see on television channels, four-letter words which start with S and go on to CAM. That's something which is really troubling the industry. By the nature of the job that I do, I get to spend a lot of time with the CEOs, CIOs, CFOs of all our large telco companies. And let me tell you, they are a worried lot. If you look at their body language, their thinking, their thought processes compared to even a year ago, it's pretty, I would say, tentative at this point in time. But having said that, for an industry which has grown so rapidly over the 10 years, if you look at it from a very, I would say, a slightly relaxed and a disjointed or 30,000 kind of feet view level, I think it's a point in time when you've grown rapidly over a decade. This is a time for the industry to pause, consolidate, and move on to what's going to be the next phase. And I'm pretty confident that the telecom business in India will continue to go from strength to strength. And what we are seeing is part of a cycle which any industry goes through. We probably came to this cycle very fast. In most economies, businesses, industries go through cycles which are 20, 25 years. But by the sheer speed at which we have grown in the telecom industry, this has probably happened to us in a decade, decade and a half. So now's the time, as we go forward and you folks will reach out into the telecom world, I thought let me share with you 5 key trends that are going to impact the telecom business as we run it today and going forward. The number one factor is the demographic change. And the next few slides, the data which I'm going to present to you is based on a study done in the Asia-Pacific region, including India, and specifically as it relates to the telecom industry. There's a fundamental shift happening in terms of the users, the consumers of this service which is being offered to people. And the fundamental part of that is that if you slice the customers, the users, the preferences of the people who use the services, the telecom services, there's a big component which is about 37%, which is what we call Generation Y. These are folks which are exactly like yourselves, born 1977 onwards. And if you are a telecom company or if you're going to run one soon, you need to understand the preferences, the thinking, the thought processes of this generation more than anybody else, because this is the largest constitution of your customer base. This data is purely related to our telecom industry in India and Asia Pacific. Now, if you look at the Generation Y, the whole thought process, thinking, behavior is completely different from people like myself and others on the first 2 or 3 rows of this auditorium who run these businesses. You know, in the time and space when we grew up, I remember if I wanted a telephone instrument or my father wanted one, we probably had to apply to BSNL, which was then called DOT, and wait for 5 to 6 years before you got an instrument. Same happened with a lot of other services and products. These days, the whole Generation Y which has been brought up from day one with very easy access to communications, to very easy access to the internet. From your very early days, you guys have grown up with the internet. So as people running telecom businesses, when they look upon you as the single largest set of customers, users, it's a completely different ballgame. 73%. What does this figure represent? As part of this study, what was found that this millennial generation, Generation Y, okay, when they go about using services from telecom providers, and they were asked that if you had one single bad user experience, what percentage of this population is likely to shift their service provider? 73%. People in this room or people in telecom companies, when they look at this figure, it's astounding. 37% of your customer base, the millennials, one serious bad user experience and they'll switch the service provider. I had the good fortune of being escorted by one of your student colleagues to this institute this morning, and I was sharing this number with her and she said, yes, this is absolutely right. When a lot of our students moved into this campus, we were using a service provider. The service was very bad. We tried to tell them a couple of days. They didn't listen. Within a week, 70-80% of us shifted from service provider A to service provider B. That's reality. So think about it, when you're running a telecom business, you have a large percentage of your customers which is extremely agile, extremely demanding, extremely into things like instant gratification, and they're not going to wait too long before they switch. And what else are they going to do? As they switch, 85% of this population, as they switch, they're going to go out and put it on blogs, on Twitters, and share it with everybody on social media. That's another big impact telecom managers, people running these businesses have to keep in mind. Not only are these demographics changing, but they can impact your brands pretty fast. The other change, and I'm going pretty rapidly through some of these things because you're going to hear a lot of this over the next 2 days, is the way people interact. The whole concept of interaction as defined by the telecom industry is going to change very rapidly. And that's brought about by preponderance of social media. I'm sure all of you being in this business know this very well. Professor Patil touched upon this as well. Only data point I could share with you at this point in time, I don't know if all of you have heard this. If you aggregate all the email traffic on any given day on this planet, if you aggregate all the email traffic on any given day on this planet, whether it's Yahoo, whether it's Gmail, plus everybody's private domains, including sitm.com or avaya.com, whatever, aggregate all the public and private email, the amount of communication happening over there, if that's a number which is X, okay, and then you take the amount of communication Y, which is happening on Facebook and Twitter alone. Y surpasses X at this point in time. So there's a fundamental shift happening. As telecom players, we think a lot about voice and voice-based services and how do we move on to data. And we probably try to look at models in the US where they moved from voice to data. Even when we're looking at this, the whole paradigm is shifting from just email and internet, which is voice-based, to the completely new phenomenon, which is around social media. And that's growing extremely rapidly. You know, there are all kinds of data points on this. But the point of the matter is that if you're going to run a telecom company, if you look at the telecom companies and the businesses of the future, as much as they're outsourcing a lot of their infrastructure, as Professor Patil mentioned, there are these dimensions which are fundamentally going to impact what they need to deliver. There's another bit of information from the same study which we did, which fundamentally says that if you look at Generation Y, the millennials, which are the majority of telecom service provider consumers today, they are a lot more open and their preferred mode of communication, whether it's for business offers, any kind of interaction with companies in the telco space, their preferred option is social media. So this study asked the millennials and everybody else in the customer base, what is your preferred mode of communication? Would you like social media to be the way by which telcos reach out to you? Gen Y, 40% on an average said, yes, that's the preferred mode of communication. Are telcos thinking about this? I meet a lot of telco CEOs, CIOs, technology architecture people over there. They're still worried about giving you reliable voice services, but at the same point in time, the demographic and the interaction change is completely creating a new demand on how they need to shape their networks. This is a quote from Gartner. I'll allow you to read this. This is just another version of how important this whole concept is. But it is a study which has been done across the globe, across industries, and what's staggering is this number, 80%. By 2013, 80% of businesses will suffer a revenue loss from not supporting web-based customer service on mobile devices alone. So we're not talking about having a web presence, we're not talking having a social media presence. Just a very narrow question on mobile service providers. If you don't give web-based services, guys are not going to be happy with you. There's another part of that same survey itself. Continuing with what Gartner says, preponderantly, it's going more towards recorded messages, 60% for essential information. Customers, users were asked, essential information, do you want it like voice or text? Text overrules that space. And then there are still people who want special deals, etc. Again, wanting text as a preponderance of the way they would like to communicate. Just to bring out the point that the whole concept of demographics and interaction change are fundamentally going to change our industry. The third one, which is going to have a big impact on our industry, is this whole concept of devices and apps. What do I mean by that? At this point in time, when we think of telcos, the first thing we think of up till now was just the mobile phone. Very rapidly, this is moving on to smartphones, tablets, all kinds of very different devices which have to ride on the same telecom network. I can tell you I had from the center of the city to your campus about a 30-35 minute ride, and I was on 3 devices at the same time. I was using my iPhone to talk to a few people. I had my laptop, which I had a Photon CDMA card plugged in, and an iPad on a 3G connection. Think about it. From a telecom service provider, when he engineers his network, the kind of customer service they need to offer, it's completely changing very rapidly. Not only that, when you couple that with the apps which are going to run on telecom networks, because that's where the future of ARPU is. Voice as a commodity has been beaten to death. We've all spoken about it. It's kind of a rest in peace kind of a discussion now. What's happening increasingly is applications like m-commerce, m-health, Twitter, Facebook, etc. All of you must be knowing of our largest telco in India, which is Bharti Airtel. And they made this acquisition in Africa of a telco called Zain, which gives them a footprint in around 16 countries there. I happened to go visit them in Kenya, and I was talking to them. Right now in Africa, we may think they're a continent which are a bit behind countries like India and Asia Pacific and even US, but telcos in Africa get almost 40% of their revenues from m-commerce today. So it's a completely different paradigm when you think about how the next wave is going to happen in terms of devices, applications. That's a big change which is going on. It's another data point from the Yankee Group, which tells you that by 2014, tablets are going to be the preponderant and the basic device of choice which most people will use. Today, tablets are growing faster than MP3 players, TV sets, gaming consoles, whatever have you. Move on to the next one. So I was talking to you on the first 3 trends that we see more from an end user, consumer, people like you and I perspective. Telcos also serve large enterprises in terms of the fat bandwidths they give them, the enterprise networks, intranets, MPLS networks that they build for them. What's happening on that front? Key slide on that. What's happening on the enterprise front is if you look at the main modes of communication which enterprises use, in the past there used to be disparate or separate networks for data, for voice, for video, and other modes of communication. With the advent of IP all over the place and most of our telco networks moving towards MPLS and NGN kind of architectures, this has merged very fast. So enterprises are making and I deal with enterprises day in, day out. I'm seeing a very rapid shift over the last 2-3 years where networks are finally converging. People have been talking about unified communications, convergence for a very long time. But in the context of India, in the last 2 or 3 years, this has really gathered pace. And what's going to happen is, if you look at the next phase in terms of enterprise demands or requirements out of telcos, it's all about converged collaborations and application integration into communication networks. There's this whole concept which I'm sure you students would have thought about or heard about and learned about, which is called communication-enabled business processes. It's a completely different paradigm which is happening, puts a lot of pressure on telcos, but also gives them an opportunity to go and get new revenue streams. What do I mean by that? We've gone and implemented an application for one of our larger telcos over here, where you go and integrate their entire customer care suite, which is what we provide, their back-end telecom infrastructure, and you kind of merge it very tightly with your ERP and CRM system. An example of how that is used is if you are a subscriber to that telco and if your bill is overdue by say 25, 30 days or whatever, they can have alarms and triggers over that. That CRM, which will pick up the data from the ERP, I'm using some jargon here, can automatically trigger calls, email responses, webcast responses straight out of the communication system on the back end. So increasingly what you're doing is enterprises are moving from siloed different technologies for data, voice, video, converging them onto one communication platform, And in the next phase, we are seeing early adoption of communication actually converging with business applications. And one of the things which is going to kind of again propel that going forward is this whole concept of SIP. I'm sure all of you would be learning this technology called the Session Initiation Protocol. My bet and the industry's bet is that what IP did to the internet and to data, and why all of us are in this room to a large extent, is because of this wonderful protocol called IP, which proliferated data, converged all networks, and makes all of what we're talking about possible. What IP did to data, internet, email, etc., SIP, Session Initiation Protocol, is going to do to communication. It's a pretty bold statement to make, but SIP has the potential of actually virtualizing all of the communication platforms, technologies that we have. You kind of are able to use SIP technologies to go multi-vendor, multimodal. You can make disparate technologies talk to each other and also bring in things like presence in telecom networks going forward. You're going to keep on hearing words like context, presence, multi-channel, multimodal, and what's going to make that possible is this whole technology which is going to proliferate into enterprise and SP networks, which is around SIP, Session Initiation Protocol. Last one, inevitably when you talk about trends, I think one of the trends which is very prevalent and which we've been talking about, Professor Patil alluded to it as well, is this whole concept of the cloud. What we are seeing right now is that even in India, people have started adapting the cloud pretty rapidly. But at this point in time, most of the deployments of the cloud are around what is called private clouds. So most customers, whether it's on their IT or even communication side, are saying, yes, we will use cloud technologies, but we'll build our own cloud as opposed to going on to a public cloud. We feel, and it's pretty inevitable, that this move from the private to the public cloud would happen pretty rapidly as telcos develop more rapid infrastructure. Because technologies in terms of SIP and other protocols are now available, which allow the telcos to virtualize things on the back end and start playing big time into the cloud game. So think about it, even from this trend point of view, as you step out into the brave world of telecom, it's not just going to be about things centered around voice or maybe chat and email. It's going to be about a lot more things which a telco can now offer enterprise. And the key players in the cloud space as not only are going to be the technology providers, but telcos will have a proper left and center role to play in that. Because at the end of the day, the cloud is nothing but virtualizing your compute, your application, all those infrastructures, and actually connecting it on large telecom pipes, which need to be a lot more sophisticated, rich, intelligent, and obviously can generate a lot more ARPU for you. And then, the point that I'm trying to make is in the telecom and the world that you and I live in, which is all about communications, the whole concept is moving from interaction to collaboration. And this is going to get, all of it is going to get web-enabled. This is kind of a summary slide of what I've been talking about, demographic change, interaction change, device change. And going forward, what's going to happen is technologies like SIP will allow you, there's a fundamental change in which communication is going to happen in future. So in past, all communications were point-to-point. They were connection-oriented technologies. IP on the data side made it non-connection oriented. Similarly, SIP makes all communication at a very fundamental level from connection to session-based. And a session is kind of an immersive bond. So you and I, anyone in this audience, two of you, could start a communication which is based on chat. And on the same channel, on the same mode, you can upgrade that to voice, move back to video, all of that in that same SIP session. These are fundamental shifts which technology is going to enable, and this is going to happen much more rapidly than we think about. And we feel that a lot of that is going to happen in terms of how telcos implement that around the cloud. It's just an idea of how a lot of the things which we talked about, federated context, CBP, social media, video, all of that is going to increasingly get cloud enabled with technologies like SIP, which allow you to virtualize all of that. So just to sum up, we saw a few few key trends which are going to affect our businesses going forward. I'm sure speakers after me are going to go into a lot more detail on that. I thought I would keep it at a higher level, so you have these 3, 4, 5 things which you want to ponder about over the next couple of days as you go through these sessions. And then if you look at it and juxtaposition it with where our Indian telecom industry is, yes, we've grown very rapidly over the last decade and a half. I think we're at a point where we're going to pause, consolidate, and move on. Very aptly, this session has been called to the next phase of growth of the telecom industry. And as we do that, some of these trends are going to be extremely important in how the telecom industry shapes itself. I hope this has been a useful session for you. I'm going to be around. I don't know if formal questions, answers are allowed, but you could always catch me outside and share your thoughts with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for sharing with us your views on the key trends affecting the telecom industry. Focus on the tech generation and the surgence of social media are aspects that we as future telecom managers cannot afford to neglect. And we thank you for emphasizing on the importance of those, along with other crucial points like devices and apps, m-commerce, converging networks, and IP, and of course the cloud. I would now invite my colleague to felicitate Sir with a memento as a token of our gratitude. Thank you, sir. May I request you to kindly take a seat amongst the audience.